Our next session is a panel session, Helping the Poor, and our first speaker is Dr. Christian Stadler. Dr. Christian Stadler is a professor in strategic management at Warwick School. For the past decade, he devoted his energy to the investigation of long-living corporations, how they grow, adapt, and consistently beat their competitors. His work has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the BBC, and has been translated into 11 languages. Over to you, Christian.
Urbanisation grew up in western Uganda. And life was great until he was about 16. He was the son of a upper-middle-class Indian family, but when he turned 16, the president of Uganda, Idi Amin, decided that all families of Indian descent have to leave the country. And his family moved to the UK at the time. Now, Sundhir, over the next decade or so, took a number of menial jobs. He was a taxi driver at one point. He was working in a supermarket, worked in a butchery. Not any grand job over this time. Now, in 1985, he decided that he wants to return back to Uganda and use his savings to start a business. He had managed to save $25,000 over these years, so it was an okay amount to start off as an entrepreneur. And he started to import beer from Kenya, which he sold in Uganda. Now, this business was running smoothly and well for a few years, but in 1989, the government decided that they will stop all import of beer to stimulate the local production of beer. Sundhir knew that he himself would not be able to produce any beer and had to look for a new opportunity, something else he could do. He had quite a lot of foreign exchange because customers of his beer business tended to pay him in foreign currency, and he decided to open the first exchange bureau in Uganda. Over the years, this business grew. He also started to invest in property. He started at one point to open a bank. He started a hotel group. He started a university most recently. Today, Sundhir Ruparelia is the richest man in East Africa. He is allegedly owning about a quarter of the central business district in Kampala. Now, this is, of course, not a typical African story as much as Bill Gates is not a typical American story. But nonetheless, it sheds light on how much opportunities you find in Africa. Africa is not just a basket case. It's not just a place where there is war and terror and abductions of people and poverty. It is a place where there is lots of opportunity. Between 2000 and 2010, of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, 6 of them were in Sub-Saharan Africa. 6 of them were in Sub-Saharan Africa. How often do you hear that story? It's not something we commonly come across. Now, what's the reason for that? Yeah? What drives that growth in Africa? There's 2 forces in place which are working together. The first one is urbanization. Franz Mattis, a historian in Innsbruck University in Austria, spent most of his career looking at industrialization and how and why different countries industrialize. And one factor he noticed that was common across all those countries that industrialized was that before that happened, they had urbanization. Yeah? People moved into cities. There started to be a market for dividing tasks, having division of labor. And this is what we see right now in Africa, where we have the fastest growing urban populations across the globe. We have, by now, 50 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants, which is equivalent to what we see in Europe. And of course, you know, not all is grand, but even those pictures that we see of the slums and of dire situations are places where improvement, where progress is happening. Some of you might have seen a few years back this BBC miniseries about Welcome to Lagos. Yeah? If you've seen that, one of the chaps in that series was Eric. Eric was working on a dumpster, yeah? And well, you know, maybe not a fantastic job, yeah? But he was collecting rubbish, sorting it out, reselling it, and using some of the money that he was saving that way in order to record a record, which later on in the program was actually played on radio in Lagos, yeah? So even in these kind of jobs, people find opportunities in big cities. A typical example is house girls, yeah? Many of the people living in rural areas, the younger girls, they decide to move into the cities, they work as a house girl somewhere, and maybe, you know, on the side they start to wash clothes for families that are sitting around, accumulating some money, sending it back home to their villages, enabling education for some of their siblings or other family members. Full amount of progress here in urban cities. Now, the second force that combines very well with the first one is the entrepreneurial spirit, the enthusiasm, the drive that I see when I travel down to Africa. In pure numbers, yeah, when we look at how much of a proportion of people are entrepreneurs, it's mind-blowing, yeah. Over here in Europe, in the UK, in other countries, the government is constantly thinking of how can we possibly encourage more entrepreneurism. You go down to Africa, in Nigeria and Zambia, for example, yeah, this is where you have the highest rate of entrepreneurism across the world. 39% of the population that is in working age is running a business that is less than 3.5 years old, yeah. And while, I mean, that's something that creates, of course, opportunities for them, opportunities for others that work. Typical story, yeah? I travel quite a bit to Nairobi because my wife is from Kenya. And when we go down there, we meet family and friends who are examples of what's possible if you are using these opportunities that these growing urban cities are offering you. So for Karani, for example, yeah, one of our friends, when he was at university, he started to sell flash drives, yeah? And, you know, first legs basically as an entrepreneur. When he finished school, job situation was not great at the time, so he thought, you know, he has to do something himself. He managed to get a basement spot where he started a barbershop. He, from an aunt, got a truck which he was using to transport fruit from some of the plantations outside the city and sell them inside the city, until a cousin of his who was driving a truck was having an accident, the truck went out of business. And on he went, yeah, new opportunities coming his way. One of the sort of first breaks for him came when he started a sports marketing company where they organized street ball tournaments for big companies like Coca-Cola. And then most recently, a friend of his returned armed with a degree from MIT, and they started a software company where they offered business-to-business software. Now, this has had phenomenal growth, where today they employ almost 100 people, and they compete for contracts with some of the big Western players when they're seeking new business. Full of opportunities, yeah? I think the central message that I want to give you today is that Africa is not a basket case. Africa is a place where opportunities are happening right now. See it more like you saw China, Southeast Asia maybe 10 years ago. Think about maybe, you know, when you start your career after uni, this is a place where I could go and start my career. Rather than maybe thinking I give $10 to an NGO, think about starting to invest in some of the businesses down there, because one of the big issues for entrepreneurs is usually getting access to money. Now, sounds a daunting process, how you find the right place to invest, yeah? But nowadays, yeah, we just heard about the sharing economy. These things are starting to become easier. So Thunder Fund, for example, a South African firm, allows you quite easily to put a bit of money into a startup down there in South Africa. And you'll find a number of these platforms that enable you. So as you go away today, go away with the feeling that something exciting is happening in Sub-Saharan Africa, and that maybe you consider this to be a journey that you want to be part of. Thank you very much.